It was supposed to be another night of quiet service. Wine glasses polished until they gleamed, plates placed with invisible precision, and a waitress nobody noticed. But then Naomi Brooks saw it, a shimmer of gold resting against the billionaire's chest. At first it was nothing, just a locket, delicate, expensive, forgettable, until the chain swung forward, and the photograph sealed inside caught the light. Naomi froze mid-step. Her heart stopped. She knew that face, even faded and worn. It was her mother, the same mother who had died a decade earlier. The woman Naomi thought she had lost forever, now staring back at her from around the neck of Armand Duval, a man powerful enough to buy entire cities and arrogant enough to think no one ever questioned him. In that instant, Naomi's silence shattered, and the entire room was about to change forever. It started with a shimmer of gold, not a chandelier, not a ringed glass, but the faint glint of a delicate chain swaying in the low amber light of the restaurant. She almost didn't notice it. Naomi Brooks had trained herself to keep her eyes on the trays, on the glassware, on the movements that kept service invisible. But that night, as she leaned to adjust a linen napkin at the corner of the billionaire's table, the light caught the small oval locket nestled against the chest of Armand Duval, the French-born CEO known for swallowing companies whole. The room was humming with quiet power. San Francisco's skyline spilled from the glass walls like a million watchful eyes. Crisply tailored men traded lines like fences. Polished women laughed softly into crystal goblets, and at the head of the long polished table, Armand commanded the center like a king accustomed to feasts. His presence was magnetic in the way typhoons are, beautiful from a distance, terrifying up close. Naomi kept her steps steady. The rule was to glide, not walk. Never distract from the conversation. Never shimmer brighter than the company you served. Invisible grace. That was her art. But the locket shifted again as Armand reached across the table to make a triumphant point about global markets and untapped borders. It swung forward just slightly, its clasp winking like an eyelid. And Naomi saw it. Not the gold, not the oval, but the picture sealed inside. Its lacquered surface just visible through the protective glass. Her hand froze an inch too long on the linen. She blinked once, sure she had imagined it. The face inside the locket was younger, softer, surrounded by a faded photograph's haze. But she knew it in the ache that ran down her spine, in the memory cast suddenly across her chest like a shadow long lost. It was her mother. Her heartbeat thundered with disbelief, so loud she thought it might drown out the voices tumbling over the table. She forced her hand to move, sliding the napkin into precise alignment. But the sight of that locket burned against her eyes. Armand didn't notice. He was laughing at something, a deep, commanding rumble that echoed across the walnut like thunder rolling down a mountain. He leaned back in his chair, tugging at his cufflinks, oblivious to how the gold chain had shifted, how the delicate locket sat revealed. Naomi steadied her breath. The temptation to stare drilled into her bones, but she trained her gaze downward, feigning interest in the water levels, quietly adjusting a glass. Inside, however, fire raged. Her mother, how? Her mother had died 10 years ago, gone with unanswered questions, stories Naomi was too young to complete. She had no heirlooms, no photographs besides the crumpled few in a shoebox hidden beneath her bed. And here, dangling from the chest of a billionaire who had never looked at her once that evening, was a locket with her mother's face encased inside. It made no sense. There was no reason for him to have it. No explanation that didn't churn Naomi's stomach with dread. She retreated toward the service station and leaned against the counter just long enough to tighten her trembling fingers around a bottle. She needed her breath steady, her steps anchored. She couldn't be seen unraveling before a room that treated her like wallpaper. The conversations carried on seamlessly. Words of mergers and expansions, predictions about technological futures, laughs as casual as footsteps across worn carpets. Only Naomi's world had splintered in the space of a heartbeat. She closed her eyes. Memory washed in uninvited. Her mother's voice, soft, lilting, steel hidden beneath grace. The endless stories told on nights when Naomi couldn't fall asleep. The lullabies that blended Japanese inflections with old gospel hums. The way her mother's hands always smelled faintly of ink from signing too many documents late into the night. And that locket, Naomi remembered faintly, as if peering through fog. Her mother had worn something once, a small pendant she never explained, a necklace she tapped absent-mindedly while thinking. Naomi had forgotten it until now, until she saw it swing on the chest of Armand Duval. The edges of the world shimmered with disbelief. Nothing about this night was supposed to matter to her beyond the polished rhythm of service. Billionaires argued, partnered, conquered across tables every week in this city. Naomi watched them, served them, faded from their eyes with studied invisibility. But this was different. This was her blood crossing into their untouchable circle. She returned to the edge of the table, tray balanced delicately, her face a practiced mask of stillness. Yet every movement she made honed towards seeing that locket again, confirming that her eyes hadn't betrayed her. When he leaned down to laugh, when he gestured to make another grand point, she caught another glimpse of it. And there it was, the same photograph, the same face, her mother. Undeniable. She was not wrong. Each second felt like an hour as Naomi's mind whirred. Questions sparked like fireflies in a storm. Did he know her mother? Did he love her? Betray her? Steal from her? Was he the shadow that had crept silently across Naomi's past, the unseen force behind the unanswered questions she had grown up carrying? Armand's booming laugh filled the silence again. Every other guest watched him enthralled, as if the world's oxygen came only from his mouth. And Naomi, breathing that same air, wondered whether the man basking in reverence was tethered to her bloodline in ways no one else in that room could possibly fathom. The tray in her hands felt suddenly heavy. It wasn't wine glasses anymore. It was the weight of a secret straining to be shouted. But protocol kept her lips pinned shut. Manners welded into her bones by years of surviving on silence. She could not speak. Not yet, but her eyes had already spoken. They had burned into that locket so deeply, she swore the gold chain must feel it, must know it was no longer hidden. And though Armand Duval remained oblivious to her gaze, Naomi understood in her bones. This night was no longer just a dinner. This was the opening of a truth buried 10 years deep, and sooner or later silence would break. Naomi forced her body into its routine, gliding between chairs, refilling water, placing plates as though nothing had changed. But every movement now was deliberate espionage. She had been trained to disappear, but now invisibility was her weapon. What they did not notice was her watching, studying, hunting for cracks in Armand Duval's mask. The locket still shimmered faintly at his chest as conversation spiraled around him. He leaned forward, pontificating, his accent smooth as silk and sharp as glass. "Gentlemen," he declared, voice rumbling, "you're not merely investing in technology, you are investing in the future of civilization. And those who hesitate, those who cling to old fears, they will be drowned when the tide rises." The table broke into polite laughter. Applause even sparked from one overeager guest. It was theater, and Armand was star and showrunner both. Naomi served in silence, but her pulse roared in her ears. Every time the locket caught light, Naomi's chest tightened. It was real. She had memorized the lines of her mother's face, the way children memorize constellations. Now, across a battlefield of egos and power suits, that face stared at her through time. Her mother's absence had been an unanswered question that shaped her childhood. Whispers in living rooms, files that didn't open, relatives who shrugged with hollow eyes. Naomi had built her resilience around the space that absence left in her. But to see her mother's image here, claimed by someone like Armand, was worse than memory alone. It was intrusion. It was theft. She slipped back to the service station, heart racing, eyes trained on Armand's gestures. "He wears her like jewelry," she muttered under her breath, though no one could hear. And once muttered, the words refused to dissolve. The dining room glittered with exclusivity, chandeliers dripping crystal, candles whispering flames above half-eaten plates of quail and lamb, city lights stretching like a kingdom beneath them. Every detail screamed opulence, but for Naomi, wealth no longer mattered. Only truth remained, and truth hung from that chain. Foster, the manager, passed her with a tight glance. His eyes warned what his lips didn't: stay silent. "Don't forget who you are." Naomi bowed her head, playing the role. But inside, she no longer belonged to the script of service. Her story had changed. Armand leaned back again. This time his hand brushed the locket, thumb pressing over the glass cover with such unconscious familiarity, It stole Naomi's breath. He didn't even seem aware of the gesture, yet it was tender, possessive. Naomi's chest ached with questions. Had her mother given it to him? Had he stolen it after she died? Did he even know Naomi existed? As she poured another glass at the end of the table, her mind snapped under the flood of possibilities. She thought of nights she had stayed late at her sketchpad, drawing portraits from memory. Her mother's eyes, her smile, her steady hands. She thought of times classmates sneered, "Where's your family?" And she lied because truth was too complicated. And now the lie had a face sitting less than 20 feet away. The dinner blurred forward through courses, but Naomi's focus was fixed like iron. After dessert arrived, roasted pears glazed in caramel, Armand began another speech. This one softer, personal. "I have built," he said, placing his hand on his chest, again pressing against the locket unknowingly, not because of privilege but because of sacrifice. "There are people in my life who shaped me, who gave me reason. Without them, you would not see me here tonight." Naomi's knuckles whitened on a tray. Her throat tightened. He was talking about her mother. He had to be. Her pulse burned. She wanted to scream, to slam a hand on the table and demand, "What was her name to you? Why do you carry her face?" But rules gripped her lips shut. Her job, her survival. The gulf between his world and hers was too wide for storming across, yet her eyes betrayed her. Every glance, every stolen second, locked onto that gold oval. She didn't realize she had stopped mid-step until Trent, one of the suited men beside Armand, raised an eyebrow. "You all right, sweetheart?" You froze, the room tilted toward her. Naomi swallowed hard, pushed her tray forward and smiled mechanically. "Apologies, sir." She bowed her head, carried on. But Armand noticed. For the first time all evening, he noticed her. His hand brushed his chest as though checking for the weight of the chain. His eyes flicked to Naomi, not long but long enough to register that her stare hadn't been accidental. Long enough to slice through her invisibility. Naomi's stomach churned. Did he recognize her? Did he see her mother's face in her features the way strangers sometimes did, tilting their head at uncanny resemblance? His eyes lingered just a moment longer, unreadable, before he turned back to his audience with seamless grace. But Naomi had felt it. A shift. No longer was she a shadow in his periphery. She retreated once more to the station, forcing her hands to wipe down nothing at all, just to give them motion. Her reflection in the polished silver tray stared back at her, eyes wide, chest heaving with the impossible weight of revelation. Her whispers returned, fragments carried under breath. "That's my mom. That's my mom. That's my mom." Outside, the city glittered. Inside, a war between silence and outcry pulled Naomi taut until she ached. Because tonight wasn't about service anymore. It wasn't about wine glasses or porcelain plates. Tonight was about that locket, about the secret inside it, about a billionaire and a waitress bound by a truth neither had spoken aloud yet. And somewhere deep in Naomi's chest, something shifted. Not anger, not fear, something heavier, determination, whatever it cost. She would find out why Armand Duval wore her mother's face against his heart. Naomi steadied her breath as she returned to the long walnut table, balancing a bottle of Bordeaux that weighed more heavily in her dripping fingers than wine ever could. The chatter grew louder as deals shifted into abstract promises of grand futures. But beneath their surface laughter, beneath clinking silver and laughter scraping porcelain, Naomi's eyes stayed pinned like magnets toward that chain glimmering at Armand's chest. Twice more she caught Armand's eyes drifting back at her. He smiled faintly, a soft curve of suspicion masked as courtesy. The billionaire was studying her now, and Naomi could feel it. She poured into crystal glasses, her movements fluid, but in her throat burned a choke of questions. Which were harder to silence? The questions about her mother, or the truth she already knew, the oval picture in that locket did not lie. Naomi shifted to leave, but Armand's voice caught in the air like a net. "You," he said suddenly. Every head at the table turned. Naomi froze, bottle mid-tilt. "You move with precision," Armand continued, his accented English measured. His smile broadened like a lion sniffing around curiosity. "Not simply a waitress. You've had training." Naomi bent her head quickly, hiding her storm behind practiced neutrality. "Hospitality, sir. Nothing more." Trent chuckled condescendingly. "She's good at topping glasses. Very impressive training indeed. Laughter from the table licked flames toward arrogance. Naomi's jaw clenched, invisible inside. But Armand's eyes didn't look away, not yet. They anchored to her face as if hunting recognition, as if he were searching for the puzzle piece in her features that kept nagging at him. She hurried back to the shadows, her skin hot under his stare. At the service counter, she drew shallow breaths, fingers gripping glass with trembling resolve. The spell of invisibility had shattered. He had seen her, and Naomi knew seen meant danger. She thought of her mother again. The faint melodies hummed late at night. The warnings whispered against Naomi's hair. You will have to be stronger. You will have to survive what others overlook. Her mother had always been preparing her for something Naomi never clearly understood. And maybe tonight was the revelation. Out of the corner of her eye, Naomi caught Foster signaling curtly. His shoulders were bristled steel, his warning clear. Get back to work, stop hesitating. She nodded, swallowed her fear, and returned to duty, her body autopilot as her mind circled the Locket storm. Armand reached to pour his own glass. This time, Naomi saw him finger the chain with deliberate touch. His thumb stroked the locket like one does a relic, a talisman. His eyes wandered the room, but his thoughts seemed far away, anchored in memory only he knew. Naomi couldn't pull herself from watching. Did he mourn her mother? Did he remember nights Naomi herself never knew happened? Was this man a friend, a colleague, a secret lover? The abyss of possibilities gnawed at her spine. Derek, seated beside Armand, brought the focus back to business. We're scheduled to finalize the merger in 2 weeks. All signatures in order, your board aligned, ours practically salivating. Yes, Armand chuckled absently, but Naomi caught him fiddling with the locket again. Talking of contracts while clinging to her mother's photograph like a buoy, she carried fresh plates to the head of the table, her hand brushing close, the faint perfume of expensive bourbon clinging around his seat. He looked up suddenly, meeting her gaze again. For one bone-freezing second, Naomi swore he saw her, not as a server, not as passing staff, but as something else, familiar, recognizable. Your eyes, he muttered in a note curious enough that only those beside him might notice. They remind me. He stopped, coughed it away and turned back to the table. Naomi could barely breathe. She shuffled back to the counter, her chest shaking with contained revelation. The truth was fracturing Armand's composure at its edges. He saw something, maybe everything. Her reflection in the polished serving tray caught her again. Almond eyes, proud cheekbones, the legacy her mother left etched into her face. For years, strangers had tilted their heads and said softly, "You look just like her." And now? The richest man in the room looked at her the same way, only with the shock of memory. Naomi flexed her fingers. She couldn't hide in service forever, not with truth clawing for breath. When the mains were cleared and cigars discussed, Naomi hovered close, catching fragments. Armand spoke softer now. His booming authority faded just a degree. "My life," he murmured to one guest, shaped by one extraordinary woman. "She taught me more than any academy." Naomi's equilibrium shattered. He was talking about her. He had to be. Her hand shook so violently she nearly spilled wine. Foster twitched angrily from the corner, snapping hand signals to steady herself, clueless of the volcano erupting behind her ribs. Naomi steadied the glass, inhaled fire, exhaled iron. She turned, scanning the skyline outside the glass wall for patience. San Francisco glittered ignorant, unaware that inside this gilded atrium, a forgotten daughter and a billionaire had already begun a slow collision. When she turned back, Armand's chair scraped quietly. He rose, smoother than expected, holding his glass in one hand and his locket with the other. His toast came softer, personal. To sacrifices, he said, eyes landing, this time intentionally, on Naomi for a fraction longer than comfort allowed. To those who shape our journeys, even if they cannot see where they lead us. Glasses clinked down the line. But Naomi? Her knees locked beneath her, breath hitching on truth. That was her mother carved into those words. That was her life folded into his toast. Her palms tingled, her heart surged, and she realized both of them were now tangled in recognition that could no longer be unspoken. Naomi's hands ached from gripping the cutlery, as if force alone could anchor her racing heart. She barely heard the laughter that followed Armand's toast, every sound muffled under the pulse in her temples. He had raised a glass not to partners, not to billions, but to sacrifices and to an extraordinary woman. His words were laced with memory, and his eyes, those precise blue-grey eyes, hadn't drifted across the table when he spoke. They had locked briefly onto her. The locket swung again as he set his glass down, catching light like a beacon, tormenting her with evidence. She couldn't be mistaken. That was her mother's likeness suspended on his chest, tray after tray confirming it. Foster hissed at her from the edges of the room, motion sharp and impatient. Naomi snapped into motion, but her composure was marked with cracks. Her roll of invisibility had worn thin. It flapped like torn silk in wind. She carried a silver platter, approached his side. For a daring moment, her eyes lingered on the locket itself. She didn't mean to. Her gaze was a magnet for truth. Armand saw it. Their eyes collided, and like lightning, Naomi felt everything shift. Our billionaire titan's face flickered. Not control, not showmanship, but recognition coated in shock. Her tray almost slipped. She caught it, but something important had already fallen. The curtain between them was gone. Derek cleared his throat at the end of the table, oblivious. "Armand," he grinned. "We need to finalize numbers before the lawyers smother us in red tape. Enough speeches, yes? Let's cut through this." Armand didn't laugh this time. He brushed the locket unconsciously, voice a rare, absent murmur. "Yes, cut through." Naomi retreated toward the service station again, chest pounding. This wasn't survival anymore. This was destiny closing its jaws. She thought about what speaking might cost her. Foster would fire her instantly. Derek and these sharks would sneer. Armand himself might destroy her credibility with a single raised brow. But the price of silence felt heavier. To hush the fire now would be to betray the weight of her mother's memory. Kimiko Hayashi's story echoed in Naomi's thoughts. Another woman underestimated in silence. The billionaire whose resilience Naomi had imagined only hours ago while serving. Perhaps it had been a warning or maybe an omen. Silence was not surrender. Her jaw ached from clenching. She inhaled shallow, exhaled steel. The air was heavy with truffle and cognac. But Naomi's sense of taste had turned to dust. Across the table, Armand leaned forward to whisper to Derek. Naomi's trained ears caught fragments. Second stage of acquisition. Difficulties resolved. Still she lingers in memory. She froze. That phrase, "she lingers in memory." Was he speaking of her mother still or an entirely different ghost? The words thrummed with double meaning. Naomi's chest burned. Her mother's face gleamed in that gold oval still. And with each tender touch Armand gave it, Naomi's resolve hardened. The final course arrived. Plates gleamed, sauces perfect, forks adjusted like weapons of etiquette. Naomi moved like clockwork, until finally, unable to endure any more, she leaned low, closer than protocol allowed, and whispered in trembling French-laced Japanese, "That locket. Where did you get it?" Armand's spoon clinked against porcelain. His head darted slightly. Words froze on his lips. Naomi hadn't meant for the room to hear. But Derek turned sharp. "Pardon? Did she just speak to you?" Trent snorted. "For the help's getting bold." Naomi's blood chilled, then flamed. She backed a step, breath ragged, but Armand raised his palm softly. His eyes locked to hers. He stared long enough for the entire table to squirm. Silence sat down with them, uninvited and unrelenting. His lips parted finally. "This," he said, fingers brushing the locket. "It belonged to someone very important." Naomi's throat tightened. "It belonged to my mother." Her words were barely above a whisper, but they detonated across the table. Forks paused in midair. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Derek's brow furrowed at first in disbelief, but Trent actually chuckled rudely. "Your mother gave jewelry to billionaires? What fairy tales are we telling tonight?" Naomi ignored them both, eyes locked to Armand, daring him. She felt her lungs collapse and fill again, quieter now. She continued, "That is my mother in that photograph. 10 years she's been gone, and you sit at this table wearing her like a forgotten keepsake." Tell me why Armand Duval didn't laugh. His pupils widened starkly, color drained from his face. His fingers closed over the locket protectively, like a man exposed in public naked. The other executives began prattling nervously, murmurs of "out of line," "unacceptable," "remove her." But no force in the room could shift Naomi's gaze. Armand dropped his spoon into his soup with a heavy thud. "You—" His voice cracked. He steadied it with a deep inhale. "You are her daughter." The words didn't boom like his speeches. They fell like stones into well water, rippling across the silence. Naomi's heart nearly broke her ribcage. Her fingers curled into fists. She wasn't hallucinating. The locket was her mother's. His recognition proved it, and with that recognition came fury sharper than she had ever known. All the swallowed silences, all the overlooked years, every moment she had believed she imagined pieces of truth, confirmed. Armand stood slowly, chair legs scraping hard against marble. The entire table waited. His expression was no longer mask nor charisma. It was memory, regret, recognition. Naomi spoke again, louder now, her voice ringing like a bell finally freed from its gag. "Explain." The air in the lavish dining room turned iron thick. Armand Duval straightened, one hand over the locket. He searched her face desperately, as though every line of her eyes, nose, and jaw pulled him farther into a past he had tried for years to bury. Finally, in words sharp but soft, he murmured, "Because your mother was not just anyone to me. She was everything." The room froze, power shattered, and Naomi realized her world was no longer one of silence. It was one that demanded the truth at last. Naomi's chest heaved, her fists tight at her sides, yet her gaze never wavered. Executives shifted uncomfortably, muttering about decorum, about boundaries, about audacity. But their words were nothing compared to the storm sweeping between Armand and Naomi. He held the locket in his palm now, no longer pretending it was mere adornment. His other hand trembled slightly as he pressed the oval open, clicking its small latch. The photograph gleamed under candlelight. There was no denying it any longer. Her mother's younger face, bright, steady, immortalized in sepia. "I promised her I would protect her memory." Armand's voice wavered between confession and command. "She saved me once, saved my company before it even existed. I owed her everything, and when she left this world, all I kept was this." He tapped the locket, his eyes dimmed with grief Naomi had never expected in a man so powerful. Naomi's throat tightened, anger surged, but beneath it a strange ache cracked open, as if some hidden piece of her mother's puzzle had just emerged. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice rose, reverberating across polished walls. "Why did I have to serve at your table like I was invisible, while you sat here wearing her against your heart?" A gasp rippled through the room. The words were forbidden, a breach of service, of protocol, but Naomi didn't care. Armand's eyes met hers. He did not flinch. His mask fell completely away, leaving only a man stripped to bone and memory. "Because I never knew you existed," he said simply. The confession struck like a hammer blow, the sharp arrogance erased, revealing something earnest, something raw. Naomi's knees nearly buckled. Derek hissed under his breath to Trent, "This is insanity." "Shut this down," but neither dared move. They had witnessed something larger than mergers and contracts. Naomi swallowed, her voice trembling but strong. "Well, you know me now." And she, her voice cracked, fire steady in her chest, "She was not just your past. She was my mother. You don't get to carry her alone anymore." Their eyes locked across the gulf of wealth and service, and for the first time that night, Naomi wasn't invisible, wasn't silenced, wasn't small. She filled the room. Armand closed the locket gently and bowed his head, humble, reverent. Not to the executives, not to Derek's numbers, but to her. Naomi exhaled sharply, and the weight pressed into her ribs for 10 years finally broke open. For once the silence around her belonged to her, not to the men at the table. The others sat stiff, powerless, watching what none of them understood. A billionaire and a waitress bound by the ghost of a woman who had shaped them both. Naomi stepped back toward the doorway, hands trembling, voice steady. "My mother's story isn't finished," she said. "And starting tonight, I will not let anyone erase it." The golden locket shimmered in Armand's hand, no longer a hidden secret, but the center of a history dragged, alive, into the light. And in the hush that followed, Naomi knew her voice had finally rewritten the ending. And so what began as just another dinner ended with the kind of revelation no billion-dollar deal could contain. A gold locket, a hidden memory, and a daughter who refused to stay invisible. Naomi didn't just discover a secret that night. She reclaimed a piece of her story, a piece of her mother, and a piece of herself. These are the moments that remind us the truth always finds a way to surface no matter how deeply it's buried. If this story gripped you, if it made you hold your breath the way Naomi did when she saw that locket, then don't let this be the last time. Subscribe right now because we share stories every week that prove the quietest voices can carry the loudest truths. Stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that changes everything for you.